Hey, what's up everybody? How to Tech bringing you the reassembly of this Motorola Droid 2 Turbo. I'm going to go ahead and start off with the battery. Make sure it's nice and flat before you go ahead and start to put it back in on the phone. You can see it fits in one way. There's a little bit of a guide outline of where it should fit in. So just try to get it pretty close to that. You shouldn't have any problems getting it to seat back in towards the logic board. We can go ahead and put our front-facing camera back in as well. We're going to snap that back into this little daughter board up here at the top. This just snaps in like a pair of jeans. Make sure it's lined up properly first before you start pressing down extremely hard, or else you could bend the little pins in there. We're going to go ahead and pull back this little tape here to put our logic board in. You want to do your best to make sure you get all of these out, cables out from underneath it. And you want to go ahead and insert the display cable, the one that's right next to my index finger and my thumb. Make sure you insert it into its ribbon cable connector as you're putting the logic board into the phone. I'm going to go ahead and pull out a couple cables here that are kind of stuck underneath. We're going to pull out the battery cable here from underneath the phone. Alright, now what we can go ahead and do is start putting these connections onto the board. We're just going to try to make sure that everything's fitting properly. We'll go ahead and put down our digitizer ribbon cable here. Just have a little tiny bit of adhesive that's going to hold it down. And then you can go ahead and insert its cable back into its connector as well. You may have to remove the tape just a little bit if you haven't removed it far enough already. You can go ahead and just use our fingers to kind of insert it back into its connector. We'll go ahead and put our battery connection down because it might be in the way before we start to do that here real quick. Now these can be a little bit tricky to get them to seat properly. You can see there's a little white line on it. You want to try to make sure that's as flat as possible. It should come pretty close to the connection area of where the top portion is going to snap down on top of the ribbon cable. Once we have it seated in there, there we go. Now for some reason your touch isn't working, this is the cable you want to come back and check on. We'll go ahead and seat our microphone down here at the bottom. Snap down our connection for the display cable. This will be the one that gives you picture. So if you're not seeing a picture on your screen, you'd want to check the tightness of this cable. Go ahead and snap down the cable for the power and volume buttons onto the board. This little antenna cable here, this could be for either the Wi-Fi or could be the cellular connection. And then we'll put a little metal post here back into the guide slot. Now that we have all the connections put back in place, the next step is to actually take the tape here and put it back over its connection. So this one goes on top of the digitizer ribbon cable. And we'll put the one back on for the display ribbon cable as well. This might serve a dual purpose of kind of keeping electronic interference out. We don't want to make any metal on metal connections here, so it could give you that kind of interference protection. And don't worry too much if your board's just a tiny bit loose. When we put the plastic backing back on, it'll go ahead and kind of snap everything back into place. You can see it kind of wiggles a little bit here, and that's fine, not a big deal. The next step is to take our metal bracket that we took off that was covering all of these ribbon cables and put it back into the phone. You can see that there's two screw holes here that are going to line up right next to the battery. We'll go ahead and put both of those screws back in. And again, we want to put these in firm, but we don't want to over tighten these screws. We don't want to damage this board by pressing this in too hard. So normally there's a little bit of locking thread on them that will kind of keep them in place. So you don't have to put them in extremely hard, and you also don't want to strip out the screws. So if you ever have to take it back apart, you don't want it to be too difficult to do so. Put our second screw in down here. Now we can take our tape and fold it over the top and try to just spread it out as much as possible on top of this bracket. Just kind of unfurl this corner here. Alright, now with that done, the next part is a little bit trickier. We're going to go ahead and put the back housing on of the phone. But we have our power button and our volume button here. And it took me a little bit of time to figure this out, but there's these little plastic retention or kind of stickers here that go right on top of the power button and the volume. And these need to be re-flattened out against the phone. They have a little bit of adhesive on the back of them. And those kind of help line up the power button and the volume button. So you can see me kind of pressing it out. It's a little hard to see here. But you want to make sure that those are nice and flat. And you can actually take them off and flatten them out and then put them back on. They have some adhesive behind them. Once you get them flattened out to as flat as you can actually just test the button here. You can go ahead and put your button onto the little metal bracket here. There's a little post that it sits onto. And then you can test it by holding it down and then pressing against the button itself on the inside. So you can see that it's kind of bent back out. So we're just going to pull it up a little bit here and get our button to fit back on. And the reason why you want to do that is because when you're reassembling the back housing, you have to put these in and then push down on the housing. So they have to slide over this plastic piece, and if they're bent down, then you're not going to get that click feeling of your button. Alright, so we're looking pretty good here. Now what we're going to do is take the housing and we're going to put it on the back of the phone, and we're going to put a couple of screws in it, enough that it'll kind of hinge the phone on one side. That way we can put our buttons in without having to have all sides of the phone pop up. I think this will probably be the easiest way. Your phone may have turned on at this point with pressing the button so many times, and that's okay. We're actually going to test the buttons here in a few seconds once we get them inserted in. So put in like just a screw or two on the side, and I'd probably put one on the bottom of the phone as well. And the goal is just to hold the housing a little bit tighter to the phone. We'll put one up here at the top also. Alright, now you can see that we can squish the phone, but it's not an extreme amount of pushing we have to do to get it to where we want it to fit. So we're going to put our volume button back in, and it only goes in one direction, so make sure you put it in the correct way. Put our power button in also, and it goes in one direction also. So you can't really mess it up, but you may have to finagle it a little bit to get it to kind of get where you want it to be. Now it has to sit on top of those posts on the inside, so you want to kind of push it flat and then test the button. If it's functioning properly, then you can go ahead and put a screw in there and it should work just fine. But before you put all the rest of the screws in, what I would do is I would suggest that you test everything at this point that is inside the phone. So your Wi-Fi, your cellular connection, really everything to make sure it's functioning properly. So we're going to make sure that the volume up and volume down work here. Perfect. There you go. Nice click feeling of the original phone. Go ahead and power it off after we've tested everything. And now what we're going to go ahead and do is just put all the remaining screws back into the back of the device. And there are a bunch here. Snap down our two connectors on the back. We'll also need to put our grommets onto the phone, but we'll do that after we remove all the double-sided adhesive off the back of it. So let's just go ahead and put all the screws back in here and kind of start from there. Remember, there's 4 silver screws. The silver screws go at the top and the bottom of the phone. 2 silver screws at the bottom, just on either side of the charge port, and then 2 screws at the top, one above the camera and one to the side of the camera. Putting in the first silver screw down here at the bottom. And again, we want this to be nice and snug, not over tightening these, but we don't want any gaps around the frame of the phone. We want it to be nice and tight without stripping the screws or damaging the plastic on the phone. Right, a few more to go. Now once you get all the screws back in, also you still want to test your buttons again to make sure that they're still going to function. Up and down the sides of where these actually touch. Sometimes some pressure back into these can cause them to get a little too sticky, so we don't want to have that happen. Alright, the last two screws up here at the top are going to be the silver screws. One off to the side of the camera. And the one above. Now with all the screws back in place, we're just checking to make sure there's no gapping around the sides of the phone. Now with all the screws back in place, what we're going to do next is remove all the adhesive off the back of this phone. We're going to put all new double-sided tape down to make sure we get a nice tight fit on this back. We don't want any weird ridges or any weird feeling on the back. We want it to be nice and snug. So that means removing all of the adhesive off the back cover, which can take a little bit of time. I just usually rub it off with my fingers and then kind of pull and get it started. Now that we have all of the adhesive removed, the next step is to go ahead and put the adhesive or the grommets back in. We'll put the grommet in towards the bottom connector here first. You can't really mess them up. They got unique shapes that kind of fit back into place, and they just kind of snap back in if you give them a little bit of push. There we go. Now we can go ahead and use our double-sided tape to reapply adhesive to the back of this phone. Remember, we want to be generous. We want to have as much adhesive as the original phone had. We'll start down the side here, and we want to get it as close to the edge as possible without it going up the side of the phone. We don't want any ridges in the tape. We don't want any bubbles in the tape. We don't want any tape overlapping. All of that would create some imperfections on the back of the phone when you reassemble it. So just be a little bit cautious when you're laying this down. So both sides of the phone. Then we can go ahead and start. We want to get tape on the sides of this Motorola button here. And the reason behind that is if we don't tape this down over the blue spot here and then to the frame, this button's going to wiggle a little bit. And we don't want that to wiggle because you want to put your finger in that little Motorola Moto logo there, and it doesn't feel very good if it's not extremely tight. Now I apologize, some of the shots of this are going to be super grid. I'm trying to get used to the new rig here. But I'll flip it around. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to taper the edges of the tape to fit on the bottom of the phone here. I'm going to do the same thing on this side. So we just cut it at an angle and get as much adhesive towards the corners. We don't want the corners to pop up. We'll do the same thing up here at the top. And again, the goal being to not overlap tape on the edges of the phone at all. We'll go ahead and start applying adhesive elsewhere on the device now that all of the corners are covered up. I'm going to put it around the wireless charging here. And we're going to put it in a kind of an oval shape around it. Get good adhesion here because we're not going to put any tape in the middle of it. So we want it to feel nice and snug against the back of the phone while there's still a gap in the middle of it. Now this is 5mm width 3M adhesive, and I actually prefer to use VHB tape, but I have a lot of this stuff lying around. So unless it's holding down something that might be generating heat, I've been using this 3M adhesive, but really you can use any double-sided adhesive that you would like on this portion of the phone, as long as it's nice and thin. Here we go. Make sure not to cover up the vibration motor as well. And I definitely try hard to not cover up any ports, any openings in the back of the phone. We don't want to cause anything to not work like it should. Alright, now with all the adhesive applied, put one down here just to the side of this. Now, with all the adhesive applied, the next step is to go ahead and just peel it back. So using a sharp tool, go ahead and peel back. So you can see the tape wanted to come up with this one as I pull it off. So I'm going to push it back down and being careful to make sure there's no ridges on the tape. And if it does happen where it kind of wants to wrinkle, cut it off, put a new piece of tape down, so that way you don't get any funky feelings or spots on the back of your phone that you're going to notice when it's reassembled. So something you can do to help the tape not pull up is make sure your device is nice and sharp, or the tool that is nice and sharp that you're using to pull the tape backing off, but to kind of push down on the edge in which you're pulling up first. So push it down just a little bit, or if there's a gap where you're trying to put your tool in, try the opposite side of the tape. Getting there, almost just a few more to go. The tape got a little wrinkly, but we smoothed it out okay. Just do these last two pieces up here at the top. Alright. Now the next step is to take our clean, fresh back that we cleaned all the adhesive off of and go ahead and lay it back on top of the phone here, lining up the corners right around the Motorola logo, and then kind of snapping it down on the sides. And don't press in the middle just yet. You want to make sure all of the corners are in, and then you can kind of press in the middle. We don't want it to have to pull the back off of it again and do all that tape work. Then just take your time and smooth out all of the seams where you put tape. And make sure that it feels nice and snug. Now with that done, we can go ahead and put our SIM card slot back in. We'll go ahead and power on the phone and make sure that the screen is working with touch, which you probably did already when you tested your phone before you put all the screws in the back. But we're just going to take a quick look and make sure that it's still functioning properly for us. Now if you found this video helpful, hit the like button. If you have any questions, throw them in the comments. I'll do my best to get to them. I do have a lot of videos on YouTube, so I get a lot of comments, so I can't answer them all. But I'll do my best to get to them if you have an extremely important one. You want to see future repair disassembly videos, hit that subscribe button. I'd appreciate that. That helps keep everything chugging along. And here we have our phone back on. Battery's a little low, but it should function correctly for us. We've got cell signal, and there you go. Thanks for watching. Catch you in the next one. Peace.